This is page 46 in our notes. We're continuing on with standard EE3. With this standard, there's two main things we're going to be doing. We're going to be expanding and factoring algebraic expressions. Expanding and factoring algebraic expressions. And we actually did this on test 1. We called it the distributive property. So this is very similar or like the distributive property, except for now we will just add some variables as well as our numbers. So the first thing with this particular standard that you're going to see is you're going to be asked to expand. You're also going to be asked to factor. So when it says to expand each expression, you're going to do examples like the ones I'm about to show you. So the first example, we need to expand. So they're going to give you an example like this. It's going to say 2 parentheses r plus 8 close parentheses. And we talked about this before. Anytime we see a number right next to parentheses, that means multiply. It's implied that you need to multiply. So you need to take 2 times r and 2 times 8. We did this before without having a variable in here, and we talked about 2 times r, and then we brought our arrow up to get our answer, and then 2 times 8, and we brought our arrow up to get our answer. In this case, we're just going to do it, but we're just going to bring it down. So 2 times r looks like 2 times r if you were to write it like this, and then 2 times 8 would be like looking like this, 2 times 8, and then the plus is in between them. So 2 times r, to simplify that, you can just put it together as 2r, and then you have a plus, and then 2 times 8 you can go ahead and say is 16. And that is how you expand the expression so that it looks like that. Basically, you know you need to solve. The 2 was next to parentheses. You needed to multiply. You needed to distribute the 2 to both of them inside. Let's do another example to give you kind of an idea here. 5, maybe you see a dot and then parentheses m plus n. So 5 times both of these, you have to remember to distribute 5 times m and 5 times n. That's what that looks like. So writing it below, it would look like 5 times m and a 5 times n, and then the plus is in between them, so you leave it like that. How do you combine these to be a little more proper? You don't need the dot anymore. 5 times m, you can just write it as 5m. That means multiplying. The plus is there, and then multiplying 5 and n next to each other. You don't really need to know what m or n stands for. You just needed to multiply 5 times everything inside of the parentheses. That's expanding. Let's do another example. I have 3 parentheses 2k plus 6 close parentheses. So when you look at this, you see a number next to parentheses which tells you need to be multiplying. So you're going to have to multiply 3 times the 2k and 3 times the 6. So I like you writing that. 3 times the 2k, and you need to take 3 times the 6, and the plus is in between them. 3 times 2 is 6, and then you just write the k with it, so you just multiply the numbers. 3 times 6 is 18, and then you just put the plus there. You can't combine 6k plus 18. We talked about this in the last lesson. This is like having an apple with a k, and this is like an orange. It's just a number, so you can't combine those together. You can't say 6 plus 18 to try to get an answer. You can't add those together because this has a k and this one doesn't. So that's what expanding looks like. It takes up about 3 lines on your paper. Another part of your assignment, you're going to see the directions that say, are these equivalent? Equivalent meaning, are these equal? And they're going to give you 2 examples, and you have to look and see if they're equivalent. Are they equal? So the first example is 6 parentheses x plus 5, and then it has the word and then the other example is 6x plus 30. And so you're looking at these and you're going, how do I know if these are equivalent? Well, anytime you see a number next to parentheses, that means multiply. You need to solve this one out. You need to distribute it out. How does that work to distribute? You need to take 6 times x and 6 times 5. 6 times x, if I write it down below in parentheses, and then 6 times 5 right down below in parentheses. They both have a plus in between them. 6 times x is the same thing as saying 6x. And then 6 times 5 is 30, and you bring the plus down. So what you're looking at is 6x plus 30. This is like your apples and your orange. You can't combine them together for like 36x because this doesn't have an x. This one does, and this is just a number, so you're done. But is this equivalent to what this one was over here? So you would say, yes, these are equivalent. How did you know what to do? You should have seen the number next to parentheses to know you needed to multiply there. Let's do another example, and we'll see if these are equivalent. 4 parentheses, so immediately when you see that 4 next to parentheses, you know you're going to have to multiply on this one. Y minus 4, and the one on this side they're going to give you is 4y minus 4. So you're kind of glancing at those, and you're like, ooh, a lot of the same numbers, they might be equivalent. Well, you don't know until you solve this one. And what do I mean by solve? You need to distribute the 4 and times it by the y, and distribute this 4 and times it by the 4. So 4 times y is what that looks like. And then 4 times 4 is what that one looks like. And this one has a minus between them, so you just put a minus there. 4 times y is 4y. Your minus comes down, and then 4 times 4 is 16. So here we go. Is 4y minus 16, is this the same as 4y minus 4? You should be saying no. These ones are not equivalent. This is not equal to, not equivalent. It's an equal sign with a slash through it. They are not equivalent. The next part you're going to see on your homework, which is also on your test. The directions are going to say factor each expression, and this is actually what you did on test 1. They called it the distributive property. You are factoring out, when you hear factor, you're pulling out the greatest common factor. And so we've got 3 examples here. Example 1 is 2y plus 10. So when you're factoring out the greatest common factor, this is like what we did on the first test. We skipped a line, we put a blank under 2y, so it's right below it. We put a blank under 10, and we brought the plus down. Do you remember us making these parentheses? Then we called this one the GCF. So you're factoring out the greatest common factor. In other words, you got to look at your numbers. Between 2 and 10, what's the greatest common factor that goes into both? The one that goes into both would be 2. And then 2 times this blank has to give us 2y. Well, if you think of there's a y up here, you have to have a y right here. 2 times what number would give us 2? You would say 2 times 1, but we don't write 1y. Anytime you have 1y, that just 1 times y is still just y. The 1's implied. You never really write a 1 in front of a variable. And then 2 times this blank has to give us 10, and that would give us 5 in this blank. So nice and neat, your answer would be written as 2 parentheses y plus 5 close parentheses. So very similar to the first test we did with distributive property, except for now they're throwing in a variable. So let's try a couple more examples. Number 2, the example is 6z minus 9. So to set this up, we skip a line, we put a blank under the 6z, a blank under the 9, minus in between, parenthesis, parenthesis, and we label this line GCF. So what is the greatest common factor with 6 and 9? I feel like these numbers are small enough you don't need to use the ladder method to find the greatest common factor. You can just look at them and say, oh, I see it, 3. 3 goes into both numbers. Okay, well 3 times this blank has to give us 6z. Since there's a variable there, we have to have a variable here, so the z's there. 3 times what number would give us 6? We need a 2. So 3 times 2z would give us 6z, and 3 times what would give us 9? And we would fill that in with a 3. So nice and neat, your answer is 3 parentheses 2z minus 3 close parentheses. And I want to do another example over here. Example 3. 3x plus 3. 3x plus 3. The directions are factor. So factor means you got to pull out the greatest common factor. So we skip a line, we put a blank under those, a blank under the 3, the plus, parentheses, and we label this line GCF. What is your greatest common factor between 3 and 3 when you're looking at the numbers? You should see 3. 3 times this blank gives us 3x. Well, you have to have an x because there's an x up here. 3 times what number would give us 3? 1. And remember, we do not put a 1 in front of x. It's implied that this is 1x. 3 times what gives us 3? And we would need a 1 here. Nice and neat. 3 parentheses x plus 1, and you are done. That's what factored form looks like. Factored form, you're pulling out the greatest common factor in front of it. The expanded form, the factor was in front and you have to distribute and multiply out to look like this. So you can take this form and work, this is what it looks like in fact, this is what it looks like kind of in factored, or I'm sorry, this is what it looks like in expanded form. You could take it back to factored form where you're pulling out the greatest common factor and you're putting it in parentheses. So these are kind of like the reverse of each other, expanding and factoring. It is important that you understand, like, are these two equivalent? You have to solve this to figure out if they're equivalent or not. That is going to be on your test. So put a star over here on the side. I'm going to put distributive property was on test number 1. Remember, we were having to factor out. That's what factored form means. Factor out the GCF. And remember, we put that on a line. And the other thing I want you to take away from these notes is that you don't need to write like 1 in front of a variable. So don't need 1y. You would just write y. So we don't need 1y. I'm going to put like a slash through it. We would just want y. You don't put a 1 in front. So your homework assignment for this is the back of the worksheet you did before, and this back of the worksheet is 7.4 is what it says at the top. At the top, it is worksheet 7.4. You are going to do all which is numbers 1 through 22. Lots of practice expanding and factoring. You may have to look back at your notes to know what that means. What happens when you see a number next to parentheses? You need to multiply it. If it's already like this and they ask you to factor, you have to pull the factor out and you're putting it in parentheses. So they kind of work back and forth. That homework looks like this. Practice 7.4. You're expanding. Each one of these you have to multiply. There's a number next to parentheses. You're factoring, so then you need to make it look like this, where you're factoring out and you have parentheses. Excuse me, you need to see if these are equivalent, expanding, simplifying, combining like terms.